Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Trail Talk Highpointing podcast. I'm your host, Lauren. The Highpointer that we're speaking with today is Daniel Carmical from Texas. Daniel, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this. So to start off, I like to ask every guest to tell us a little bit about how you got started in the outdoors.
Well, I grew up in southeast Arkansas, and my grandfather raised cattle. So my whole childhood, we just had access to a couple hundred acres. So we were constantly outside, riding four-wheelers, building trails. My dad seemed to always have me in a boat. We would always be on the Mississippi River, the Arkansas River, going on camping trips and fishing trips. So I grew up outside. Like they couldn't get me in the house. When I was 10, I moved with my mom. She got transferred to Virginia for work. And that was my first time to actually see mountains. We lived in the Shenandoah Valley. So I went from flat delta in South Arkansas to surrounded by mountains. And it was different. First time to be in actual snow, like deep snow. And so that got my interest, just that there were other parts of the world that I hadn't seen, other parts of the country that I hadn't seen. And
Wow. So what brought you to Texas?
she got transferred again to Texas. She was in the plastics manufacturing industry, so moved to Texas. And I moved here when I was 12, and I've been here ever since.
Wow. And where in Texas are you located?
Longview, Texas. So we're about 2 hours east of Dallas.
Okay.
Yeah.
And a lot of the guests that I have on from Texas often say, like, I've done a lot of high points, but I haven't done the Texas high point because they don't actually live near it. And there are so many other high points that are closer than their own.
Yeah.
Have you done the Texas high point?
I have. Guadalupe Peak. A friend of mine and I don't remember exactly how far, but it's 10 plus hours to get to Guadalupe Peak. So there are multiple high points that are closer to me in different states than driving Guadalupe Peak. But yeah, Guadalupe Peak was beautiful.
Yeah.
We actually hiked it. We started a few hours before daylight. Anybody that hikes it, I would recommend doing it. Starting the trail, it's very easy. You won't get lost. And start a few hours before daylight. And to get to watch the sun come up over the horizon, it was one of the prettiest hikes that I think I've done. The fossils and stuff that are in the side of the mountain, and I guess it was an ancient ocean, and it's pretty neat. And it's in the middle of nowhere.
Right. So what started you with the high pointing endeavor?
So originally me and some friends were going to, we decided we want to do the 7 natural wonders of the world. And so we started off and we went to Alaska to see the Northern Lights, flew into Fairbanks. We were there for 9 days, and it seemed like each evening the clouds would come in and it would start to snow. And so we're thinking we drove or flew all the way up here. We're not going to get to see it. And if it was going to be snowy that day, we would go do something else. We actually went into the first part of Denali State Park. And at the time, I wasn't doing the high points. Denali, I knew what it was, but it wasn't really on my radar. And it was still early in the year, I think March. So they only had the snow cleared to like the first parking inside the park. And but we put on our snowshoes and hiked up to a bluff, and you could see Denali in the distance. And eventually, on the 8th night, we went up north of Fairbanks to a place called Sheena Hot Springs, and we were able to see the Northern Lights. That was amazing. And our second trip, we went to Arizona and we hiked the New Hance Trail down to the base of the Grand Canyon on the South Rim. So I think that was in March as well. And it's a 6-mile hike in. I think in the first mile you drop almost 1,000 feet. So you're pretty much scooting on your butt the first mile, sliding down rocks, passing your pack down. And it was with a friend of mine, James, and the weather was actually pretty nice hiking down. A few spots where there were some small little waterfalls coming off the rock. I mean, just a trickle, nothing big.
Hmm.
We hiked down. It was a beautiful day. We got down to the Colorado River, set up camp. Um, Actually, while we were down there camping, a group of kayakers who I guess got the permit to float the whole river. They were on day, I think, 10,
Wow.
and they pulled in where we were camped at and visited with us for a while. So that was neat to talk to them. And
Yeah.
I think they still had like 2 weeks to go.
Oh my
And
gosh.
but that night we hiked about halfway, or the next morning we got up, packed up camp, and we hiked about halfway out. And we're going to stay the night. And it's kind of hard to find somewhere to camp hiking up because it's, you're just climbing. And we finally found a little flat spot and set up camp. And we didn't realize that a weather or a storm front was coming in. And it was a little chilly that night, but not a big deal. And we woke up the next morning, and inside the tent, it was 13 degrees. And fortunately, my friend James, who I went with, his tent has a little stove that folds out.
Hmm.
And so we had a little stove and built a fire, and we packed up camp and we're hiking out, and all those little streams and waterfalls that we had seen hiking in, they were just solid sheets of ice.
Frozen.
Yeah, and it was, I've learned, and especially through High Point, and you have to look ahead at not only what the weather's gonna be, but what, if it's the time of the year, it still can get cold or hot, or so that was my first lesson learned on that.
Especially in the Grand Canyon, where you experience such a dramatic change in elevation so quickly.
Yes, and the 3 days we were on the trail, we didn't pass another person, so
That's awesome.
The Grand Canyon is one you definitely have to do your homework and prepare for, because depending on the trail, you can be alone. And
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well,
there are pros and cons to that, definitely. The
Yeah,
solitude on the trail. I mean, of course, there's solitude, and you're in one of the most beautiful places in the world. What could be better than that? Except if something goes wrong, and then there's no one around.
You're kind of selfish. You want the trail yourself, but
right. You don't want to be too alone.
Yeah.
So how did you find out about that trail? Because I think when people think about hiking the Grand Canyon, they assume rim to rim.
My friend James, who I hiked with, he lived in Arizona at the time, so he had kind of done the research. And we've found out that if you look for the more difficult trails, it thins out the crowd. And he read several different trails, and we found that the New Hants Trail was, I think, the most difficult trail on the South Rim, due to it's shorter than other trails, but just your descent and ascent is a lot steeper. You drop about 1,000 feet of elevation in the first mile. And so I think that thins out a lot of people. So that's why we picked that trail.
That's good. For all the listeners, can you just tell us a little bit about what that permit process is like? So I say for the listeners, but I want to know.
It's for you. So you do have to apply for the permit. And I think it's, at least for that trail, it was mainly just so the state knows that you're on the trail, how long you'll be on the trail. So we had to give the dates that we would be spending the night, how many nights. It wasn't hard to get that permit, and it may have been because it was still pretty early in the year. Mm-hmm. Like I said, I believe that was March. Yeah, it was March 2017 when we did the trail. Just a little bit of paperwork.
Yeah. It's crazy to think of, when you're planning an adventure, how much paperwork is involved when you don't think it should be.
Yeah. And taking care of all that before you get to the trail, as far as maps, trailheads, because a lot of these remote places you go to, there's zero cell phone service. So it's almost having screenshots or maps, or because you can't always rely on your phone or your GPS, once you do get out there.
And another important thing to add on to what you said about not just checking the weather, but also the state of the trail and the conditions. When you find yourself in a national park like Denali or the Grand Canyon, for example, you can go to that NPS website, and then the conditions are always updated. Mm-hmm. But if you go to more remote areas, that's when you rely on trail reports or trip
Yes.
reports, I should say, or conditions. And certain forums, I know, like the Highpointers Facebook groups. That's why those platforms are so important, because it's not just a picture of like, hey guys, look what I did, even though I love seeing that. But it's also, this is really good information to know.
Something that I've done and you can do is a lot of those go several years back. So if you're planning on hiking in
Okay.
March or April or whenever, go to the previous year. And of
Mm-hmm.
course, each year it's going to be a little different because of weather, but you can really get an idea through the years of what has happened that time of year. Did a random last minute snowstorm come in, or
Yeah.
insanely hot, or there is
Mm-hmm.
a lot of good information.
Yeah, I've even gone to like Weather Channel type of websites just to
Mm-hmm.
see trends
Mm-hmm.
throughout the years. What's normal, what's not normal, but still happens, and typical precipitation for that time of year. And the more information you have, the better. You can't go wrong the more research you do. But
It took me a little while to learn that. I know it now, but when I first started, I wish I would knew now what I known then, and a few of my trips would have been a little smoother.
oh my gosh, that could be a separate podcast.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
The fails of high pointing. That needs to be a spinoff.
Yeah, or if we got to do it again.
Mhm.
So you start off to see the seven natural wonders of the world. How did that get you high pointing?
So once again, at the time, high pointing, I really didn't know what it was.
Mm-hmm.
What actually got me high pointing, I have a very close friend of mine named Morgan, and he's a combat veteran. And Morgan and I went to high school together.
Mm-hmm.
I call him my brother. He's one of my best friends, and he has TBI, traumatic brain injury, from an explosion in the war. He has pretty bad PTSD, and I'm sure some of your listeners will know it comes and goes.
Mm-hmm.
And several years back, Morgan had actually moved to Oregon in between jobs, went up there to take another position, and he was the best that I've seen him in years. I mean, just the look on his face, talking to him, he was just such at peace in the mountains.
Wow.
And when he was living up there, it was very simple. He was kind of in a remote area. It was just him and his dog and fly fishing and hiking. And he would call me about this trail and that trail. And he lived up there for about 2 years, and it was the best version of my friend that I'd ever seen. I mean, it was like I had
Wow.
my high school buddy back. And anyway, he moved back to Texas. He works in the oil and gas industry, and he had been having a pretty rough year that year. And so I was thinking of something that I could do, just get my buddy away for the weekend. And so I said, let's go to Arkansas. That's the closest mountains to where I am in East Texas.
Okay.
And I figure if I could get him in the mountains, it would just give him a break for the weekend at least. And we didn't know where we were going. And I said, just pick me up and we'll take off. And as we're heading up there, I'm on my phone Googling what's up here. And I come across Mount Magazine, the highest point in Arkansas. And we're driving, and as I'm reading about Mount Magazine, I see stuff on high pointing and do a little reading, the highest point in every state. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, this is kind of cool. And then you start looking at some of the images, and you see people, holding the signs up and the
Yeah.
date. And we had stopped to get fuel, and there was a piece of cardboard laying beside the trash can or beside the gas station or something. And I'm like, man, I'm gonna write like Mount Magazine on that, and put number one, my first high point, and not at the time really thinking this was going to turn into something, just something cool for him and I to,
Yeah.
the day turned out perfect. Went up Mount Magazine, stopped at some of the overlooks.
It is beautiful there.
It is, and
Yeah.
the high point, if people have been there, it's driving up to the high point is really where you get the view. When you're actually at the high
Mhm.
point, it's kind of wooded.
Yeah.
But so that's what started it. Morgan had a great time. It was just a great weekend. And that was in June of 2020, I think, when I did my first high point. And by July, I was leaving to do 6 more. Like,
Wow.
something sparked that in me, and I'm like, this is what I want to do. I'd always been outdoors, like I said earlier, growing up on a farm, but I'd never actually traveled and climbed mountains and, tents and trekking poles, and it sparked something, and
Mm-hmm.
it's got me going. That was in 2020. I've done 37 as of last summer, and I have 4 more planned this year.
Does Morgan still high point?
He's actually, like I said, he's in the oil and gas industry, and he's living in West Virginia right now.
Okay.
Right on the West Virginia, Pennsylvania, and he's just eating it up. He
Yeah.
loves to trout fish. He loves to fly fish. So he has the mountains, the streams. It's
Mm-hmm.
uh,
Good for him.
yeah.
Good for him. That's awesome. So you went from Mount Magazine to 37 high points in a very short time. Where did you go from Mount Magazine? And how did you incorporate that into the rest of your life? I've prefaced a couple episodes with how, we're all normal people. We have jobs, we have family, we have life obligations. How did you do all of this in the middle of life?
Well, I work for UPS, and we actually have to post our vacations normally in October for the following year.
Okay.
And so at the time, I didn't know I was going to be high point, but I assume I just took a random July off, a week in July. And so after Mount Magazine, a month later, I took my daughter, who is now 19. My daughter, a very good friend of mine, William, and his wife and son and daughter, and we loaded up in a big SUV. And I looked on a map. The first high points I did, I tried to look at the ones I could drive to.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess you could drive to all of them, but with my limited time off, the most bang for your buck.
Yeah.
And so we did, we went up to Black Mesa. We did Mount Sunflower, Colorado, New Mexico. Just kind of made a big loop from Texas and back around. I've learned doing this high pointing, like we talked earlier, it's not just about what the weather's going to be next week, but what the time of year, what the season of year. Like I said, we took the kids. The first stop was Oklahoma, Black Mesa.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, it's summertime in Texas when it's hot, but I really didn't think of what the terrain and stuff was going to look like. I'd obviously never been to Black Mesa. So when we pull up to the trailhead, anybody that's been there, it's in the middle of nowhere, and it's like rocky desert. There's no trees, just a little bit of scrub oak. And when we parked the car at the trailhead, I believe the temperature in the car said 103 or 106 for the outside temperature. And, it's I believe a little over an 8-mile in and out hike. And so the kids were great sports about it. We got extra water, we got our stuff, we take off hiking. And one of my favorite pictures of my daughter, we're almost to the plateau once you climb up. And we took neck gaiter sun scarves, and we would pull them up over our eyes just so you didn't get so sunburnt.
Mm-hmm.
And the kids' faces are just beet red from sweat. And they're looking at me because, like, this is my thing. This isn't how teenage kids want to spend their summer. But they were all great sports about it. We made it to the summit, and on our way back, you're just pouring sweat.
Yeah.
And the kids are like, our feet hurt. And I'm like, this trail isn't really that difficult. It's 8 miles, but for the most of it, you're just walking flat. Probably a mile 6, you climb up to the plateau. And what it was is they were sweating so much that their socks were wet.
Oh, yeah.
And the next morning we woke up and they had like quarter-sized blisters, multiple, all over their feet. We still have Mount Elbert in Colorado to do, Wheeler Peak. Like the big ones are still, and it to say that the next I think two we did in Nebraska and Kansas, they're drive up
Hmm.
um, Mount Sunflower, stuff like that, so they could do that. But we went to Leadville. We spent the night in Leadville the night before we did the highest point in Colorado, just to get acclimatized and for
Yeah,
the altitude. And the kids' feet were getting better, but I knew that they needed to sit out, and so we ended up leaving the kids back at the house, and just me and William and his wife hiked Mount Elbert, and that was a Mount Elbert is beautiful, but it's very strenuous. I mean, it's the highest point in the continental 48 states.
hmm
Um, it was a beautiful trail. We went to Taos, New Mexico after that, and to do Wheeler Peak. And I'm fortunate that the kids were better. They decided to do it with us, so we all hiked Wheeler Peak. And I'll say Wheeler Peak is, from the 37 I've done so far, that's probably the most beautiful.
I agree.
You start off in the woods. It's almost like a dark forest. About halfway up Wheeler Peak, once we broke the tree line and were pretty far up, we rounded a corner, and there were about 10 of the bighorn sheep
Yes.
in the trail, and we walk around. It kind of startles, and it's funny. The whole trip, my friend William had been saying, "I want to see a sheep. Like, where's one of these? I want to see these sheep. Could you see the road signs? Like, watch out for the."
That's right.
And we're like, "Where are we going to see one of these things at?" And there's 10 of them. And at first, we were kind of quiet, like, kids, come here, be quiet, look. And after a while, standing there, I realized those sheep aren't scared of us at all.
Mm-mm.
And then I'm
They're not.
thinking, maybe we need to back off a little bit, because if they get aggravated, you can't go up because it's too steep. You can't go down because you'll roll to your death.
Yeah,
Like, we're in their world right now, so
that's right.
we were able to back off a little bit and watch them, and the kids just loved it. When we summited Wheeler Peak, it was a nice day. I mean, probably sunny in the 60s, maybe high 60s, low 70s. And when you get to the ridge where you have to actually hike up to the summit, when you stepped over that ridge, like, it blew my hat off.
Yes.
The wind
Yes,
up there
you're
was
right.
insane. And we made it, and I would say that's probably my favorite as far as aesthetics, and
Hmm.
I got to do it with my daughter, so that was
Yeah,
uh,
I agree. Taos is Wheeler Peak was one of my favorites because I actually did it by myself, but I think I associate it with a memory that's so special to me because I had just gotten out of the army and I was like, I'm heading out west and I'm going to do this high point along the way. And I stayed in Taos, New Mexico, and I'm just like, I love this place. Taos is so beautiful.
it is.
I too saw some bighorn sheep,
Yeah.
and it surprised me because it was on the trail. And I, like you, just kind of turned a corner and was like, whoa. And we both just looked at each other and we're like, what are you doing here? No, what are you doing here?
Yeah.
I just froze and that thing just froze and then it just wandered off. But you can tell they're not scared at all of
No.
of humans. And I was very cautious because there actually weren't a lot of people on Wheeler Peak the day that I did it. And I would stop periodically and just listen for anything around me because I thought I was going to run into a bear. I don't know. I did it in September and I'm thinking like maybe they're hungry, getting ready to hibernate. I don't know. And that's what I was scared of. I'm like, there's going to be a bear. There's going to be a bear. There was no bear. There were all bighorn sheep.
Yeah. Which is a lot better to run into.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. For sure. But yeah, beautiful. Tauski Village. That's where I stayed before I did the hike. So heading out east, what was your favorite peak out there?
We actually flew up to New England. Actually, my friend William that I was just talking about, another friend of mine, Paul, the three of us flew into Boston and rented a car. And I would say, as far as the overall trip, New England was my favorite. Like, you can get some of the best peaks all at once up there.
Hmm.
Flew into Boston and we went north into Maine, and we stayed at the Baxter State Park and we hiked Katahdin. And I'd probably say Katahdin was my second favorite. Um,
Behind Wheeler Peak.
yeah, just as far as you're pretty remote in north central Maine, and it's the end of the Appalachian Trail.
Hmm.
So we actually got to see some of the thru hikers finishing their
Cool.
trip. So that was, and they're easy to spot. I mean,
Yeah.
they're normally pretty dirty, and you can always tell with their packs, because their packs have all kinds of little, not necessarily trinkets, but just things they use, ropes and this tied on, and empty water bottles. And
Hmm.
it was neat to get to talk to them um, and hear some of the stories. And we actually passed a younger girl, and she had her mother with her, and she had done the trail in sections over, I think, 2 or 3 years. I mean, she didn't
Oh,
do it all
cool.
at once.
Yeah.
And it was the last leg of her trail, the last day, and her mother had actually flown in to finish the trail with her. And, you know, her mother was probably in her 60s.
Wow.
And so they were going very slow and very steady, but it was just neat seeing them get to do it together. And,
Hmm. Wow.
and we were very fortunate that when we did climb Katahdin, it was a perfect, beautiful day. The weather was nice. It actually wasn't very windy, clear skies. So from the top, you could just look over the whole valley, Baxter State Park. Um, Hiked down, and when we left the next day, just kind of looking back, I checked the weather. The weather had turned, and it was like 40-mile-an-hour winds, -10-degree wind chill at the peak. And
Jeez.
like, what a difference 24 hours could make. Like, if we would have waited one day to do that hike, we may not have been able to do it.
You're right.
Um,
So what time of year were you out there?
let's see, we did, it was October of 2022. So it was kind of the end of the season,
Oh, yeah.
um, when we were, and I guess that's why the thru hikers were kind of finishing some of theirs. I guess when we left there, we went and did Mount Washington,
Hmm.
which we drove up to it, but it was,
That's all right.
yeah, it was. And, something I've learned on this, it's hard, like you were saying, with most people have jobs. You don't have just weeks and months that you can go spend a week at Katahdin and then spend a
Hmm.
week in Washington. I mean, you could, you'd be 80 years old by the time you finished. Um, so things like driving to the top of Mount Washington, I would have loved to have hiked it, but you almost have to have your day scheduled out. And all right, by 3 o'clock on Tuesday, we need to be heading to Vermont or New York, or so it would be neater, or a little better, I guess, if I had to give someone some advice, to give yourself a few more days on each trail. Some of the best parts
Hmm.
of going to these high points were the places you see in between, driving from Katahdin to Washington to Vermont, and places that you want to stop and go check out, but you're kind of in a time crunch, and, you
Hmm.
know, uh, I'll come back and check that out type of deal.
Yeah. Yeah,
Uh,
you're right. And
or even like you have to ride a ferry from, I believe, from Vermont into New York.
that's right.
Like, I never knew that a majority of the border between Vermont and New York was a huge lake. I mean, it stretches from Canada almost all the way down. Uh, Little things like that you see along the way, it's really neat. Marcy was another. It's up there with one of my favorites.
Yeah.
I forget the name of the little state park we stayed at, but we actually rented it's kind of like one of those military wall tents, just on a wooden platform.
Okay.
So we could stay there. They had little bunk beds inside them, but of course no water, electricity. There was just a bathhouse.
Hmm.
And we got up and we hiked Marcy, and we got it pretty early. It was still kind of cold, and got on the trail an hour or two before daylight. And another thing, and I've heard some of your other guests say this, is the people you meet on the trail.
Yeah.
And so we summited Mount Marcy, and there's maybe two or three other people on there, and I see a lady sitting over there, and she was by herself, and she had her little jet bowl or whatever, making some tea or coffee, and just kind of sitting over there, and we're kind of visiting with the few people that are up there, and say hello to her, and the first thing I noticed was her accent, and her name was Regina. I'm actually still friends with her on Instagram, and she was from Switzerland.
Wow.
And she'd been at the States multiple times. She did the Pacific Coast Trail, and she is by herself in the middle of New York in a different country. And just the thought of, I mean, I would say I'm a fairly experienced hiker, and the thought of traveling to a different country, not knowing anyone, not knowing the trails,
you can't read the
being by yourself.
Yeah.
And it was just amazing. And we started talking to her, and she actually hiked down with us, and just
Wow.
the different stories. And I mean, I thought I had been to some cool hikes and this and that, and then talking to her and the Pacific Coast Trail. And I think she said she went like a week one time on the trail without seeing another human. And she said, when I
Wow.
saw the next group of hikers, she said, I just started crying, because you don't realize how much you miss, even though it's strangers, just talking to someone or seeing someone. So it was neat to, you meet multiple people on these trails, and every now and then one of them sticks with you and you can keep in contact with. And she's told me if I ever learn to snow ski, that she actually runs a ski resort in Switzerland that we can
Oh
fly
my
over there and go
gosh.
skiing with her. So,
Wow. So how did she find out about Mount Marcy? Just curious.
um, well, obviously looking at the high points, and
Okay, was she high pointing?
she wasn't. I don't believe she's a high pointer.
Okay.
I think she just likes to do trails. I believe she's wanting to do the Appalachian Trail soon.
Okay.
I mean, even talking to her, she had been to Africa and
Wow.
climbed the mountains over there. Had been to South America, Patagonia. Like, I believe like I said, she's in the hotel ski industry. So
Mhm.
when they have off season, they may not work for 2-3 months.
That's right.
So she'll pick up and come to the States and hike, or go to South America and hike, or, you're almost jealous I guess I'm kind of jealous at the time off. Like, I would love to be able
Everyone
to go
is.
somewhere
Yeah.
for 2 or 3
It's not
months.
just
And
you. Yeah,
yeah, uh,
for sure.
yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. Wow. Well, it's interesting too that someone who lives in Europe comes here for adventure. Of course, she travels the world for adventure, but it just reminds you that there's so much in our own country that we have to see
Mhm.
and experience.
Yeah,
Wow.
we always look exactly like you just said. Go to Europe and go hike the Swiss Alps, or Patagonia in South America, or Kilimanjaro, or those people in those countries almost kind of see what we have here, type of deal.
Hmm.
And yeah, the U.S. has some beautiful places and some very remote places.
Yeah. Well, and I think that high pointing is just so wonderful because of how accessible it is. No matter where you live, there's a high point in your state. Now, depending on what state you live in, it could be a little expensive to high point your state high point. But a lot of, I would say the majority of Americans could drive to their state high point and just discover this endeavor that they would have never even thought about otherwise.
Yeah. And some you can literally drive right up to.
Right up to it.
I mean, if you have someone that's elderly or in a wheelchair, or you can literally stand beside the sign and take a picture and experience it, from Florida to Sunflower to, there's a lot. I guess you think back at the high points, and some of them just stick with you for one reason or the other. And
Yep.
I have three or four high points that stand out for different reasons. And the one in Louisiana will probably be the most special for me. My mother, um, who has actually just recently beat lung cancer, uh,
Wow.
she just turned 70. And probably 2 years ago, my mother, her sister, who is 8 years older, my Aunt Mary Lou, her husband, myself, and my daughter went to Louisiana and climbed, I believe it's Mount Driscoll.
Yeah.
And my mom and aunt were able to. Now it's not a drive up; it's a little bit of a climb, especially when you're in your late 60s. But we made it. We climbed it together, and by that point, I'd already done several high points. So
Okay.
to be able to include them in one with me, um, one of my favorite pictures that I have is me and my mom and my daughter and aunt, and we're all standing up there by the sign. So that one sticks with me for a different reason versus beauty or the bighorn sheep on Wheeler Peak. The memory of
Yeah.
doing something with my family and my mom.
That's really special. I hear that a lot when I ask guests, like, what's your most memorable high point? Sometimes they'll say the most spectacular peaks, but other times they'll say peaks that are in kind of a flatter state that you wouldn't expect. And the reason that it's one of their favorites is because of the memory that they associate with those places. And I often, I love to visit national parks, and people ask me, like, what's your favorite one? And it's not Yosemite. It's not the Grand Canyon, but it's a different one that I have a very specific memory associated with. That, I mean, it's the Channel Islands National Park because that's where I had my honeymoon. But people,
Oh, in California.
yeah,
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 I've been
just
there.
north of. Oh, you have?
Oh, I have a crazy story about it. Yeah, we went scuba diving.
You did?
My same friend James that lives in Arizona, he has a big twin engine ocean boat living in the middle of Arizona. I don't know why,
Yeah.
but he drug it all the way to California. I flew in. We loaded up the boat. I think we had 21 scuba tanks, and we went out to. It's like the fifth island. I forget the name of it now.
Santa
Santa Rosa.
Rosa.
It actually has a pier on it that a ferry goes out to once a week, and they
Yeah.
have campsites that you can rent, and they have a water pump on the island somewhere, so you can go,
Hmm.
lift the spout and fill up your. So we went out there to go scuba diving, and it was the worst weather on the way back that I'd ever been in a boat. I was wondering if we were going to make it. It was
Whoa.
3 hours of 10 and 12 foot swells
No.
coming back. You would go up to the peak of a swell and you would disappear back down and you would see nothing but water. And we're in maybe a 23-foot boat. No, it's a 30-foot boat. Excuse me. Um, but it was an awesome adventure. But on the way back, I'm just thinking, Lord, just get me through 3 more hours, and I'm never doing this again. Like, uh,
Wow.
so yeah, I know what
Oh,
you're talking about, the Channel
man.
Islands. And we actually
Well,
left there. We went down to Catalina Island,
okay.
and we spent another 5 days scuba diving Catalina Island, and it was beautiful. Weather was perfect. Uh,
Yeah. Man,
yeah,
I had the more standard experience with the Channel Islands, I guess. We just got lucky with a perfect day.
yeah.
We went to the closest island, Santa Cruz Island.
Hmm.
Saw a bunch of dolphins on the way there. The ride out there was super smooth. Even the people on the ferry were like, yeah, this is rare. Went kayaking, and that was the most wildlife I've seen at a national park, was at the Channel Islands.
Yeah,
Do you have any stories about high points that maybe didn't go according to plan?
I do. Obviously, the Black Mesa,
Yeah.
the heat. Another one that stands out. My girlfriend and I, we've done probably 10 or 12 high points together. Her name's Jasmine, and we took off. I believe it was May 2022, and we did 4,400 miles. We left Texas. We went up and did South Dakota, North Dakota, Minnesota. Kind of made our way back around,
Hmm.
and started off. If no one's ever been, what's the one in South Dakota? Black Elk.
Yeah.
That's another one that it was just absolutely beautiful. went to North Dakota, drove all the way over to Minnesota. So to answer your question, one that didn't go as planned, just like I should have looked at the weather in Oklahoma, Black Mesa, it's going to be 100 something degrees with no shade. When we looked at Minnesota, the weather was beautiful. I mean, it was, I think, supposed to be in the low 60s, sunny for the day, no rain, clear skies. This is just going to be beautiful.
What
And of
time of year
course,
was this?
that was in May. Yes.
Okay.
So it would be, I guess, late spring.
Okay.
And of course, being that high up north, there's still snow everywhere. And when we got to the trailhead that morning, there's no cars. We didn't pass any cars going to the trailhead, coming back from, and it's a pretty, I mean, you drive, I don't remember exactly, maybe 15 miles, we stayed on the edge of the Great Lake and then went in.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, it's still all snow. But the trail leading in was very hard. I mean, you probably couldn't stab a trekking pole, and you could see where snowshoes had been and people's footprints. It was a well-traveled, very hard snowpack.
Mm-hmm.
And if you took your trekking pole and went outside the trail, it was probably 3 foot deep.
Wow.
But once again, it's going to be a beautiful day. We'll stay on the trail. The trail's hard as a rock, no problem. And so Jasmine and I, we take off and we get a mile or two in, and I'd seen on the map there were a few little small creek crossings, but it was just some people would pile up rocks and you could kind of step on the rocks, or in a few spots they had looked like 6x6 timbers that someone, maybe the state, had kind of stacked over a trail.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't think about snow melt and that these trails would be flooded. And we're a long way from home, so it's not like,
sure,
hey, let's give this a few weeks for the water to go down. We'll come back.
Now or never.
Yes, I'm thousands of miles from home, and we get to the first. Well, should have been a stream, but it was about thigh deep, icy slush, and it wasn't a moving river. It was just flooded, stagnant water. So
Wow.
there was no flow. So we didn't risk. There wasn't a risk getting swept away.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, I can't make Jasmine do this. Like it's not bad weather outside, but it's literally waist deep ice water. And I turn around and look at her, and she says, "No, we're doing it." She said, "We've came this far. I know how much this means to you.
Yeah.
Let's go." And selfishly, I'm like, this chick is awesome. Like, and so the first crossing, I said, all right, let's roll up our pants as high as we can get them, take off our socks and shoes, and just wade through. And I believe I had like a small towel with me. I said, we'll wade through, no big deal, dry off our feet, put our dry socks and shoes back on, keep going. Well, as we were hiking through there, like that ice is, in some places, you step on top of the ice and you don't break through. And then you would break through and it's 2-3 foot deep. And I'm like, this can't be good for our feet. Because if there's maybe a stop that a beaver had chewed off or something down there. And we finally made it through. And then I'm thinking, all right, like we can't do it with no socks and shoes on if we come up to another one. Maybe we won't, but well, we did. There were actually 4 in and 4 out. And the next one we get to, kind of the same way. You can see at the beginning where people had stacked logs, but it was flooded so high. And we left our socks on so we would have a little bit of protection. And so we ended up getting a rhythm. I would hike through first. I would turn around and lay out my jacket. Jasmine would hike through. And by the time, and this isn't like a 5 foot water crossing, in 30 seconds you're out. This is 30 yards long you're in the water for several minutes. It's not a short crossing.
Wow.
And so I would lay my jacket out. I'd get my towel ready. Jasmine would hike through. She would take off her socks and I would wring her socks out and I would unzip my under jacket and I would stick her feet under my armpits to warm her feet up as I'm wringing out the socks. And I would just sit there for a minute and, I didn't want anything to happen to her. So
of course.
I'm thawing her out and We do our thing, get our shoes on, go to the next one. And I didn't know how many there were going to be. And we got to the last one, and I'm like, the thought of we may have to turn around is we can't keep doing this. Like, we can't go. And fortunately, that was the last one. We made it to the top. It was beautiful. At least hiking back out, we knew what to expect. I was like, all right, we're going to have 4 crossings. Just keep doing our thing. I'll go through first. I'll have the towel laid out ready. And so that's, if you pull up to a trailhead and there's absolutely no one there, there may be a reason.
That's why.
So if I could go back, I would have, and like we discussed earlier, a lot of times you can look on these different forums, or I use All Trails sometimes so people can leave comments of the trails. Mm-hmm. It's worth going maybe back a year or two, and then I would see reviews, snow melt, rivers flooded. Mm-hmm. And, on that trail, I did notice when we got to the first trail, or to the first water crossing, when we got past it, most of the footprints disappeared. When we passed the third water crossing, I mean, you could see old tracks from snowshoes, people over the winter. There were no fresh footprints. So I think the water turned most people around.
Well, that is a lot of dedication to get to the Minnesota State High Point. It's funny that you say that, because a lot of guests will talk about the mosquitoes and how terrible they were. Mm-hmm. But you didn't have that problem. You had a completely different one. And that's really, it's good information to know. And that's why I was like, what time of year is this? Man, you guys were dedicated, and I admire that.
She's a trooper. I was very proud, and we've done a lot together. Actually on that trip, we left there, and we were going to go do Michigan, the highest point, Michigan, mm-hmm. with just going through what we did in Minnesota. I started looking online, light finally went off in my head. I better check, because it was a long drive to get to the one in Michigan from where we're at. And I called the local ranger station, this and that. We actually weren't able to do that one because they said that with the snow melt, that the roads leading up to the high point were either still very snowy, or the snow had started to melt and the mud was so deep for where some of the trucks had torn up the trail going up, that unless you were in a very equipped four-wheel drive, you wouldn't make it.
That's a really good idea, to call the ranger station, and you saved yourself a lot of hours of driving. Yeah. And I mean, it's a good resource. They know the up-to-date conditions, so good call.
Yeah.
How has the outdoors and high pointing enriched your life?
It makes me more open to meeting new people. A lot of times you kind of go through the motions. We just pass people, and you don't really say hi or communicate. It's just in passing. But when you're on these trails, it's almost like you have something in common. If you're both at the top of a peak, you obviously. So it's made me more open to talking to people, and not necessarily just on a trail, but somebody at church, or a customer at work, or it's just opened my eyes to the world a lot more. And it's traveling in between the high points, the neat places you see, the towns, the attractions, it really opens your eyes. Most people, and I forget the exact statistic, you kind of stay in a bubble your whole life. As far as, I live here, every now and then you may travel Cozumel to vacation, or California, but for the most part, you're not traveling across the states. You fly to a destination, you fly home. Mm-hmm. So to actually get out and travel through some of these places, and it's really neat.
You're right. I had a guest on the podcast. He's been a frequent guest, Mike Sloan. And he talks about the shared experience that you have with someone in the outdoors. And that's how the connection that you make with someone that you've met on an expedition or a hike or any similar circumstance, is that connection is more unique and more special than a connection that you make with somebody that you see in a parking lot, for example. because you are connecting over a shared experience that is unique.
Absolutely.
And I think you have to embrace those whenever they present themselves in life, because they might be rare. As you
Yeah.
said, we don't get out as much as we think. It's interesting that you bring up that statistic, and now I want to look it up. But we travel to a central hub, like an airport, that takes us to another destination. And then even when we get to that destination, we often keep to ourselves or the people that we traveled with. And then we just do the out and back, go back to the central hub, go back to home, and then you get back into your routine of driving to work, driving to the grocery store, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I think high pointing forces you out of your comfort zone in so many ways. And even in the mundane ways that you would think like, oh, I have to drive, to this state or something like that. But you never know what you'll experience in between. Are you a member of the Highpointers Club?
I am.
Okay.
I am.
Are you going to the convention this summer?
Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe 50-50. If I did, I would just fly in for the weekend and fly home.
Right. Yeah.
We're actually planning on doing the highest point in Arizona, Jasmine and I, and then we're waiting on our permit from California. We should know by the 15th. So we'll do Whitney in California, and then we'll do Nevada.
Oh, fun.
Yeah. So
that's going to be a fun trip.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great one. Flagstaff is beautiful. And what time of year are you going?
We're going August. I believe we're going to go to.
Okay.
Yeah. That's another one that we've attempted before. Flew into Flagstaff. Jasmine kind of surprised me last minute. Hey, we're going to Flagstaff. And I don't remember what time of year it was, but I would assume spring, a kind of a late season snowstorm had came through the day or two before, and reading the reports and stuff. And by then I was smart enough to look ahead. And they were saying guys in snowshoes were still waist deep trying to hike around the side to go up to the highest point.
You made the right call there, but I think you'll find that the Humphreys is very similar to Wheeler Peak.
Yeah.
In terms of the technicalities of the trail. You won't see the wildlife. I think I saw a porcupine.
Yeah.
That was cool. About it.
You don't see a porcupine every day.
Yeah. But before I get to my last question, definitely check out the Mountaineers route in California if you don't win the lottery.
Okay.
And then you can camp at those alpine lakes there that you can't camp on if you win the lottery and you do the 99 switchbacks. And those are some of my most favorite memories on Mount Whitney, is waking up and watching the sunrise. Yeah. Because Mount Whitney is not a mountain where you need like an alpine start. I mean, if you're starting on the 99 switchbacks route, yeah, you got to start that one at like midnight or something. But if you're going on the Mountaineers route, you can start at like 10 o'clock and get up to Upper Boy Scout Lake, and then you set up camp there, and the water is just so pure. It's so fresh. It's like perfect. You can cook all your food there. You go to sleep and wake up, and it's the most beautiful sunrise like you'll see. And then
how many days were you on that trail?
I think it was three days, 2 nights there. So it was a super chill summit day. I mean, we started the summit at like 9 o'clock.
Yeah.
Got up there, came back down, and then we slept another night there. Like we could have gone back down that same night, but we just stayed there another night because it's so beautiful. And there were 2 other people camping at Upper Boy Scout Lake. I mean, that's how.
So you kind of had it to yourself, pretty much.
Yeah, for sure we did. It's just something to check out. It's if you don't get the lottery.
I'll definitely plan on, kind of like we talked about earlier, sometimes you're almost rushed to do these high points, especially if you fly somewhere or you're a long way from home. You just want to get as many as you can, but we're definitely going to set out a solid 3 or 4 days for Whitney and hopefully get to see that sunrise you're talking about. And
yes. Yeah, you will not regret it. I've done some beautiful high points, but that's my favorite because of that experience.
Okay.
It was was awesome. And then the summit day, or the actual summit was like not as crowded as you would think. And it was July 4th weekend.
Really? You would
Yeah,
think that it would be packed.
it was packed. No, no, it was super chill. We stayed on the summit like as long as we wanted. It was also a perfect day too, so
Yeah.
that played a role. But that was actually my second attempt on Whitney. The first one, we were caught in a storm. And
Yeah.
I don't have enough time to get into that story. But if you listen to enough podcasts, you'll hear about it.
Oh, I'm sure I'll hear it.
Oh, we were in the middle of a storm. And it was like one of those things that you read about, like in a Himalayan expedition where everything
Yeah.
goes wrong. It was bad. Anyway,
Like the guest you had on, I forget, it was several episodes back, the lady that got stranded and they tried to send the helicopter in and the horses.
oh, Patty.
Yes.
Yes.
I was listening to her story and
Yeah.
I'm at work with my earbud and listening to it. I'm just fixated, like, what's going to happen next? How'd she get
I
out?
know. And she is a retired Army officer. It's like she can handle herself.
She's
And she
experienced.
had to, yeah.
Yeah.
I was nervous too because that was my first time hearing it. It was on the podcast. I'm like, oh my God. Like, obviously, I know you're okay because you're here, but like,
Yeah.
man, that was bad.
Yeah.
All right, I'll get to my last question.
Okay.
Do you have any books, documentaries, or podcasts about outdoor adventure that you would recommend to listeners?
Trail talk.
Oh, thanks.
But, as far as books, I read one a while back and it was called Blind Courage.
Okay.
It's about a blind man named Bill Irving, I believe. I think it was around 1990, so it's been a while ago. And he was blind and he hiked the Appalachian Trail with him and his seeing eye dog. And they actually hiked the entire trail.
Wow.
And he was fully blind, and it's such an amazing book. And I won't go too much into it. I would encourage your viewers to read it. But he summited, and just some of the stories and the flooded rivers that they had to cross. And of course, he had certain people that would meet him in different places, and people from his church would meet him. And it started to become a big story. Of course, obviously, in the early 90s, there's not social media or cell phones.
Sure.
So it's a lot of phone calls and emails and churches helping out along the way. But I guess my main take out from that book would be, I think we limit ourselves so much in life, whether it's hiking or whatever your interest, hobby, goals are. I'm a big fan of David Goggins, and he always says, when you're at 100%, you're really only given 30 or 40%. Like, you're not even halfway of what you can do. So to know that this guy hiked the entire Appalachian Trail blind with his dog, I mean, you can do anything that you set your mind to, whether it's Denali, Everest, Whitney, whatever it is. I mean, we can do a lot more than we think. Our main limitation is, the little thing between your ears.
Yes. Yeah.
And if you put that away and you have a mindset of, I'm going to make it happen. I mean, if a blind man can hike the Appalachian Trail, you can go do a lot.
You're right.
And as far as movies or documentaries, I love watching Into the Wild. I mean, I'm sure everybody's seen it, but it's just watching it makes me want to sell everything and get a backpack and hike across the world.
He had a very naive sense of courage that I think
Yes.
The more wisdom you gain throughout life, the more you lose that naive sense of courage. And I think a little dose of that is necessary.
I think the movie I think inside of us, we all just want to have that freedom just to go. And, another real quick story, most of my high points, I take different friends and family. I mean, it started off with Morgan with a certain purpose. My daughters hiked with me on several different friends, family, my mom. But I've done one trip solo, and it was kind of the East Coast, Central East Coast, Virginia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Tennessee, Georgia, Florida. I just kind of left in my truck and did that one. And beautiful. Mount Rogers is amazing. And I thought I would like the freedom of being alone. Like, it's just me. I can turn my phone off, just have a true week to myself. And but the first lesson, I believe it was Memorial Day, so it goes back to check what time of year it is, because every trailhead was just bumper to bumper.
Yeah.
But the main takeaway is when I would go to these beautiful places, they say adventure is best shared.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized I didn't like doing it alone. I wanted to have a great friend, or my daughter, or my Jasmine, or someone I love and care about to share that experience with me. And so, like you just talked about, into the wild, that false sense of you really don't want to just take off by yourself. Like,
Mm-mm.
your friends and family and loved ones, to share adventures and memories with them. It's sometimes it can be more than the destination itself.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think he even wrote that in one of his last journal entries, didn't he? That life isn't meant to, or it's meant to be shared, or
Yes.
something about how we can't do it alone. And of course, he was
I think I remember
dying
that
in his bus as he wrote that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's really special. Well,
I've heard they moved that bus. I've heard they went in with helicopters and.
Yeah, because there were too many people injuring themselves to get out there. What are the odds?
Into the Wild #2 that didn't end well if they didn't do something.
Well, Daniel, this has been a lot of fun, and thank you for coming on to the show and sharing your experience. Really appreciate your time.
You're very welcome.